Nolan Buchanan, 16, recalls Monday, September 14, 2015, as the best day of his life.
The day before, he had spent Sunday with his girlfriend, attending a traditional morning mass with her family, followed by a get-together with friends and a wonderfully romantic evening. When he woke up on Monday morning next to his favorite girl, the teenager felt like a free, successful, and influential businessman, before whom the whole world is open. After all, he was now the owner of Buchanan Construction. The young man was going to inherit cars, a house, land, and monetary assets. He also made plans for how he would manage the family business alone and do it better than his father, who brought the company to bankruptcy. To whom till June 13, 2018, when an El Dorado County jury of 7 men and 5 women found Buchanan guilty of 3 charges.
The jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. The young man was sentenced to 150 years in prison with the possibility of parole from the 25th year of his sentence. This is how his plan to take over the family business ended. Neighbors and classmates spoke of Nolan as a model kid and a good student.
As far as we know, he was never in trouble at school. As I understand it, he was a good kid. Bonita High School student Campbell Ruxton would later say in an interview that he always cared about school and seemed very kind and nice.
I'm even surprised he was arrested. But what really happened in the Buchanan family?
Let's break down this horrific case in detail. Molly first met Adam Buchanan when she came to apply for a job at his firm as an office manager. By the time they met, Adam was already divorced and raising his son Nolan from a previous marriage on his own.
Previous marriage in his cheerful, sociable, and cheerful blonde immediately caught the eye of the company owner.
The feeling was mutual. Molly fell in love, started a romance that turned into a serious relationship, and moved in with Adam.
Molly dreamed of a real, loving, friendly family and tried to build a wonderful relationship with her stepson.
Soon she became pregnant with Gavin. People who knew the Buchanans said that they were a fairly close-knit family of 4.
The head of the family, who owned a construction company, was doing well enough to live comfortably, and they even bought a vacation property in El Dorado County, California. There was a small cabin on 19 acres in Greenwood with no electricity, water, sewer, or gas. Adam, who worked in construction, helped remodel the house, and the family started visiting there often. On September 13, 2015, at a.m., members of the Garden Valley Fire Department responded to a wildfire in Greenwood Township in western El Dorado
County on Highway 193 between Cool and Georgetown. When they got there, they found that 10 acres of the property had been destroyed by the fire.
A cabin on the property was still smoldering but had burned to the ground. The firefighters saw charred remains in the ashes. The scene of the fire was untouched, and at a.m., the firefighters called the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office.
No one had realized what was at the scene yet.
The firefighters thought that the victim of
It was thought that the wildfire had trapped a pet inside the house. The coroner who arrived at the scene was faced with a daunting task.
The remains of the house were still smoldering, and there was no way to examine the inside of the house.
They had to wait for the flames to finally die down and for the temperature to drop slightly. As the coroner examined the house, he smelled the sweet odor of burnt flesh and later discovered a human skull and a burned chest. It appeared that the tragedy had claimed someone's life.
The officer requested backup. Officers from the sheriff's office arrived and took a close look at the scene. It was clear that the small, secluded, and remote cabin wasn't the primary residence of its owners. It was probably a country cabin where people came to vacation. A Dodge truck and trailer were found on the property next to the cabin. It was possible to run the license plates and find out who the car belonged to. The owner may have been the victim of the wildfire. It didn't take long to find out. The vehicle and trailer belonged to Buchanan Construction, a company owned by Adam Buchanan.
The man in question lived 160 miles away, about 3 hours away in Bonita, California.
This information confirmed the police's assumption that the house was just a country residence for those who vacation here from the city. It remained to be seen who was inside, Mr. Buchanan himself or someone else.
The company gave the detectives their first clue, which they used to kick off their investigation. The Bonita police officers were tasked with checking to see if all of Buchanan's family members were well and at home. They went to the correct address and were soon in the Buchanan's driveway, where they noticed a white Ford pickup truck. When they knocked on the door, Adam's 16-year-old son from his first marriage came out.
He was surprised to see the uniformed officers and asked what they were doing there. The officers decided to first find out who was in the house so as not to frighten the household. Maybe the company car had been taken by someone from the company and not the owner himself. Nolan Buchanan said his father, Adam, had gone away for the weekend to his country estate 160 miles away with Molly and their 8-year-old son, Davin. They were due back in the evening. According to him, his father had left him to look after the house. Investigators did not yet there's reason to believe the remains in the cabin are the Buchanans, but the info we got and the remains we found are thought to be those of two people.
By the evening of September 13th, we had enough to report the family missing in the El Dorado County fire.
The next day, September 14th, the El Dorado County Police went to Nolan's home to talk to him more thoroughly and try to figure out whose lives the fire had claimed.
Officers were met by Adam,
Howard and Susan Buchanan, the parents of the owner of the burned-out cabin, said that their son does his own home repairs and therefore travels there very often.
The parents were very concerned as they had not been able to contact their son or daughter-in-law until now.
The officers learned from the story that the house is connected to generators, but at the time of the tragedy, it had no electricity.
There were, however, gas cylinders inside, which gave two theories. The fire could have been either accidental or intentional.
By September 15th, the fire scene had cooled down enough for investigators to collect evidence, including debris from a nearby fire pit. According to Deaton James Peterson of the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, new remains were discovered that changed the direction of the case.
Police found a piece of skull with a bullet hole, which led to the realization that there was actually a homicide.
This was not an accidental fire, reported the sheriff. The remains were collected and sent for forensic DNA testing. The bullet was still in the victim's thigh. The skull with the bullet hole was a child's.
The accident version dropped. The murder version came to the forefront. No one doubted the fire was a means of destroying the crime traces. What circumstances had the crime taken place under? Was it a burglary gone wrong?
Or had the family taken their lives deliberately?
But then, by whom and why?
Could the crime be related to Buchanan Construction?
It was a company where Adam Buchanan was president and chief operating officer, and someone was holding a grudge against him due to a working relationship.
Initially, investigators focused specifically on the latter theory.
They also looked into Molly's life to determine if she had any enemies capable of the crime. Once those lines of inquiry stalled, officers turned their attention to problems in Molly and Adam's marriage. There proved to be plenty of them.
Investigators learned that over time, Molly and Adam's relationship started to fall apart, and by the time of the crime, they had been sleeping apart for quite some time.
A diary was found in which Molly described abuse from Adam. Witnesses interviewed described rough treatment and abuse.
They said Adam was rude not only to Molly, but also to the children.
Molly's mother, Susie Slankard,
admitted to investigators that there were times when she was afraid they would kill each other in one of their arguments. Molly did not break off her relationship with Adam, but she would periodically take her son, and she went to her parents' house and came back a few days later until the next fight. It also turned out that the couple liked to hunt in the area where their country house was located. Since everyone was armed, the investigators assumed that during another quarrel, one of the spouses grabbed a gun and shot. When he realized what he had done, he took his own life. However, there was an inconsistency. If the tragedy happened because of a conflict between husband and wife, it means that near the remains of one of them it had to be the weapon used in the crime. But it wasn't. The investigators thought that maybe the weapon had been damaged in the fire and wasn't as obvious as they thought. Over 5 days, the forensic team took turns removing the ashes from the house. They searched with great care, but they didn't find any weapons. At this point, they had the results of the forensic examination. This examination showed that the DNA of the bodies belonged to Adam Buchanan, Molly McAfee, and their 8-year-old son. All 3 victims had suffered gunshot wounds before the fire. The son said his father decided to use the company vehicle instead of his personal Ford, which was parked in the driveway. He had loaded the truck and trailer with rocks that he was going to use to decorate the area near his country cabin. It was this truck that police found near the burned structure. When asked why Nolan didn't go on vacation with his relatives, the young man said that he had a duty to look after the house and garden during the absence of his father and stepmother. Nolan also said that they had a neighbor who was growing grass on the edge of the Buchanan property, which caused his father to have frequent arguments with this neighbor. The neighbor was planting grass on the Buchanan property, and Nolan's father demanded that he stop. He even threatened to go to the police. Nolan also told the detectives about the company's financial difficulties. Things were not going well.
The company was undergoing downsizing, and the number of employees was down to 5.
The detectives had a lot of useful information and a suspect, a neighbor, especially since violent crime was often linked to the cultivation of illegal herbs in that area.
They felt that the threat of going to the police could have led to the murder of Buchanan and his family.
The problem was that Nolan had no idea which neighbor they were talking about. Investigators canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing all the homeowners in a row. This tactic was successful.
They found a man who confirmed the story of a quarrel with Adam over growing a forbidden crop, but after a frank discussion, the dispute was settled. The neighbor had an alibi, and another version of events didn't hold up.
What remained was the financial crisis that had hit the family's business. On September 18th, the police visited Adam's company and interviewed the employees.
Nolan's words were true. The company was in a tough spot.
It was facing bankruptcy, with debts exceeding $30,000.
Because of this, some employees were let go. Some former employees were pretty upset about the layoffs and might have been involved in the crime.
That's when investigators got lucky. Over the weekend, the local high school organized a community cleanup day. The students were clearing debris from a business park just a mile from Adam's construction company. It was there on September 19th that a small purse with a wallet and identification cards belonging to Molly McAfee and Adam Buchanan was found a .22 caliber rifle under one of the bushes. The detectives went straight to the scene of the discovery. The county sheriff's office made a new assumption.
They think the perpetrator killed the Buchanan family with the rifle and took their documents from the crime scene to cover his tracks.
The discovery was important because it meant that someone had traveled all the way to Greenwood to kill the family and then returned to Bonita to dispose of the pack and murder weapon. It seemed like a Bonita resident had done it. The evidence found near the Buchanan construction site made it look like one of the disgruntled employees had killed the boss. The detectives sent the firearm and the documents for examination.
They asked for a warrant to look at the company's records and premises.
This was lucky for them again. They found a video surveillance camera on the premises. The lens of the camera wasn't pointing at the company's territory, but at the center of the parking lot.
This discovery was a game changer.
It was only days away from being solved. The family had already left town on Friday, so investigators reviewed Friday's footage.
They were surprised to find that Adam had attached a trailer filled with rocks to a Ford F-150, not a Dodge truck as Nolan had told them.
Detectives realized that the young man had deliberately manipulated the investigation.
If the white Ford had towed the rock trailer to the cabin, someone must have driven it back and parked it in the driveway of the Buchanan family home.
Investigators re-interviewed Nolan, trying to keep him safe while getting as many details as possible. Nolan again recounted his weekend, where he had been and who he had seen. This time, they asked him what movie they had seen at the cinema, how he had paid for the shopping at the mall, and how he had paid for dessert on a date. The unsuspecting Nolan, he said he'd used his father's credit card.
The officers then applied for a warrant to search Buchanan's home in Bonita, search the vehicles, and check financial records.
The Ford automobile was still parked in the driveway. It was closely inspected and they noticed reddish soil sticking to the wheels, similar to that in Greenwood. If the Ford had been used for a trip last weekend or earlier, traces of soil might have remained, but they would not have been as obvious.
Unfortunately, the fire had destroyed the wheel tread marks near that the car had probably been to Greenwood recently, as there was a lot of dirt buildup.
The detectives tracked the bank card payments and found that Adam Buchanan had used his credit card on Friday, September 11th, at a fast food chain called Taco Bell on his way to Greenwood.
Nolan, on the other hand, claimed he stayed home, did not go with his parents, and had the credit card in his possession.
The detectives went to the diner and checked the security cameras, and sure enough, they saw what they expected. It was a Ford, not a truck.
When detectives searched the Ford, they found a Taco Bell receipt dated September 11th that included 4 drinks.
Evidence collected at the scene of the fire similarly pointed to 4 drink cups.
So Nolan was in the car. The next credit card transaction took place on Saturday, September 12th, at the Valencia Club Bar in Penryn, about 30 minutes away from the cabin. Adam's parents had previously told detectives about the bar. They said their son, Adam's daughter-in-law, liked to stop by after renovations to the cabin. Security cameras recorded when the couple left the bar, and traffic cameras on the highway helped track their route.
A Ford F-150 headed toward the Buchanan cabin around 2:30 am on the day of the fire, and at 3:30 am drove in the opposite direction. In the first instance, The camera captured Adam and Molly in the vehicle, and in the second, only Nolan.
A few later that Sunday morning, September 13th, Adam's credit card was used to pay at 3 of Benita's establishments, Starbucks, McDonald's, and a gas station.
The bank confirmed to investigators that Buchanan had only one bank card.
The facts contradicted Nolan's stories.
By this time, the forensic results had come back, and Nolan's fingerprints were found on the gun. He was arrested right in the middle of a high school class. Nolan Buchanan pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. He tried to change the story and said it was his dad who shot the family.
Then he pointed a rifle at him and took the weapon away, accidentally shooting his father.
Nolan said it was self-defense, blaming the fire and the lie on panic and extreme fright.
That's why he took gasoline and set the house on fire to make it look like nothing happened.
The defense kept focusing the jury's attention on Adam's abuse of his own son and other family members.
The medical examiner questioned the verdict because the bullet wound mark on a piece of Gavin's skull was consistent with a shot fired at nearly a 90-degree angle.
Nolan somehow managed to push the attacker away.
If he had shot at a 45-degree angle, the forensic evidence would have shown something different.
The prosecution thought that Nolan shot his brother when they were alone in the house while their parents were out at a bar.
Adam was killed first, then Molly.
Nolan took the rifle, his parents' papers, and doused the bodies with gasoline.
He set the house on fire and then he spent the day at home with his girlfriend, creating an alibi for himself. On July 13, 2018, a jury found Nolan guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. As a result, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years.
Judge Kingsbury reflected on the verbal and physical abuse Nolan faced when announcing the sentence.
The testimony was that Nolan massacred his brother because he didn't want him to. He had to choose between going through the same horror or being forced to live with what his father had already done to him. But as she did, she also listed facts about the crime and subsequent arson, the creation of alibis, and the plans to run the family business that Nolan had voiced to family members. You have the opportunity to change.
Judge Kingsbury told Nolan, "I hope you will do everything in your power to do so. If you behave well,
you will have a chance to get out on parole in 25 years under the Senate bill and Supreme Court rulings.
It's up to you whether you take that chance or not."
Nolan continues to insist he is innocent. If he ever gets out on parole, he will have to pay a huge compensation to the victims.
The amount of the payout is unknown at this time.